Hi, my name is Dr. Linda Metcalf, and this is a re-recording of an event that I shared on SF 2425 last week. I forgot to push the start button. So we're going to be talking about solution-focused narrative therapy with children and adolescents, creating safe schools. My role is I am a school counselor, and I am also a professor of graduate counseling at Texas Wesleyan University in Fort Worth, Texas. And I am very passionate about one thing in particular, although many things, but one thing in particular, and that is ending school violence. And I truly do believe that if our teachers could possibly have a new skill that would help them to engage children and teenagers who are off track, moving a little towards violence in response to feeling unimportant and disengaged, we really could make a difference. So this presentation is all about sharing with you a model that I created and published a book on in 2017 entitled Solution Focused Narrative Therapy. Again, I'm coming from Fort Worth, Texas, where we have a cattle drive every morning at 10 o'clock in the Fort Worth stockyards. And we have lots of cowboy boots and lots of cowboy hats. We also have a beautiful skyline of Fort Worth, Texas. And this is where I work. And Texas Wesleyan University is in Fort Worth. I want to start you off with asking you to do a little exercise with me. I want you to think of someone in your life who's important to you, but the relationship you have with them is not as great as you wish. So just for a minute, think about relationships in your life. And maybe there's one that you wish was just a little bit better. Okay. And with that name in mind, I want you to think about how might that person describe you at this time? As your relationship is not going as well as it should, how would they describe you? Okay, I'm just going to make a mental list of some words they may use to describe you. Is that really who you are? Is the way that you are in that person's life right now truly showing and exhibiting to them the values you hold dear? Are you showing your abilities, your emotions in a way that they get a good glance at who you really are? And then suppose that the next time you encounter that person, you pay attention to your personal values more. And as a result, you show up as your best self. Think about how would you show up? Think about the descriptions you hope that you would get from that person. Think about descriptions that you would be the proudest of. And most importantly of all, what values would you be showing that day in your language, in your gestures, however you are with that person? And then how might they describe you? Make that mental list again. And stand back for a second and think, does this describe the person I really want to be and am? You've just gone through a solution-focused narrative therapy exercise where I borrow from both models. The part about the values and are you showing up a certain way and the descriptions, that's part of the narrative therapy approach that I adore. I love thinking that with narrative therapy, we're looking at the way people describe themselves. That's called the discourse. The discourse of their lives guides us, leads us, pushes us at times to be acting in ways that's not really in keeping with who we really are. But we have control over that. And we can at times alter the way that we come across. And I think it's much easier to do that when we think about the values that we hold dear. But the solution-focused approach that really helps things move is when I asked, suppose that you went back to that person again and you showed up with those values in hand and you portrayed that to them, what would be going on? So solution-focused narrative therapy is a blend of two models. I think of the solution-focused approach as the part of looking into that preferred future, putting the wheels on the dream of that preferred future. And the narrative therapy helps to gather the hopes along the way and the values of that person. And off we go. The solution-focused approach, we know, stems from a belief that when clients recognize their strengths and abilities and successes, they are able to use those abilities to create solutions that fit them. As solution-focused therapists, we know that our job is simply to ask the questions that elicit from our clients what their best hopes are, what their best hope will be doing or looking like in their preferred future. And then at times we might ask exception questions, times when those best hopes occurred in a fraction of time. The narrative approach focuses on the belief that a client's self-perception results from mainly the discourse from relationships, family, or other contexts such as school. The person lives his or her life based on the discourse, which often influences the client's actions instead of honoring their values. And it's important that I share this with you because in schools, particularly, there are all kinds of discourses that affect kids. The children and the adolescents that I talk about and focus on in this presentation are the ones that have a discourse in their head of, I'm not important, I'm not bright, I don't belong, I don't engage, I'm the weirdo in the back of the room in the hoodie with his head on the desk. I'm the kid who didn't score high enough on the state test. I must be stupid. Or when a teacher or an administrator forgets to be respectful, I'm somebody nobody wants to be around. Living their life like this doesn't make them perceive themselves as worthy. It makes them see themselves as not being part of anything. And we know from Maslow that belonging and being part of something is everything, particularly during the time of life of young adolescents and older children. Sometimes that negative discourse that takes over and makes it hard for some children and adolescents at school to be at their very best is what we're up against. And I often tell teachers when I do trainings, the kid in the back of the room who's not paying attention, who's sleeping with his head on his desk, or giving you a hard time, being disrespectful to you, even cursing you out, that's the kid who needs you the most. Help that kid, and the rest of your classroom management will probably go better. Well, what if their best was uncovered for all to see? That engaged kid, that disengaged kid. How might the school staff respond? Maybe they take a different approach. Children and adolescents who act out are rarely consulted about things that matter to them in school. When a new school counselor says to a kid in her office, what are your best hopes? Kid often doesn't know what to say because in many fields, particularly that of education, we rarely ask our students what they want, how they want things to be, how they wish a teacher would treat them, how they wish a teacher would teach so they could understand. We hardly ever ask them the question. And when we don't ask that question, we are missing out on the most important person in that conversation. Instead, we gather around a table in a team meeting, decide what's wrong with the student, decide what we're going to do to help fix the students without any student input. To me, it doesn't make sense. The adults take charge, they punish, they threaten, and try to convince the young people that they must change and conform. And then we wonder why they don't. And when they don't and they act out, we think, well, they were just a bad kid. Some young people cooperate, but others may not, and as a result, may act out violently. And those are the students I'm talking about that concern me the most. And as a result, young people are not given a chance to share what else their role could be in making things better. And instead, they take the matter into their own hands. and it's often not very pretty. But what if the young person who had misbehaved or acted out had a conversation that included the consequences, because that needs to happen? Schools need to follow policies, they need to follow guidelines. But in addition, they had a chance to reflect on who they want to be and others to see in the world. What if? And what if those persons they wanted to see them differently listened? Could that possibly deter violence? I don't know. But what happens now is certainly not preventing it. This could be something different. I can only imagine a kid leaving an office after working with a solution-focused school counselor, feeling as if he's not a weirdo, but instead he's bright, intelligent. It's just that teachers haven't quite understood yet how to work with him. I can imagine that kid walking back from the office at the counselor toward a classroom with the counselor next to him. That's important. Thinking, maybe it's not all me. And maybe if I worked with the teacher, I might get that teacher to see who I really am. That, I think, could be the beginning of deterring school violence. So how can this make schools safer? Well, in 2020, the United States Organization Government Accountability Office did a study to understand why school shooters do what they do. Their study found that nearly half of the school shooters went back to their school to kill others, had experienced altercations with staff. Now, I'm not saying the school caused a person to go pick up a gun and kill someone at school, but I am saying, could that school have let down that student after an altercation happened by saying, okay, we're going to calm down now and go talk about ways we can get you back on track in school because you are important to us. I have really had a time when I said to an adolescent who was acting out, and I said, you're important to us here, that they didn't look at me as if they'd heard that for the first time. We need to do more of that. For every student who became a school shooter, there were adults who lacked a skill to reach that student. And as a result, let him down and the entire school down in a disastrous way. In April 2024, I delivered a TED Talk. The title of the TED Talk was, Is there a link between teacher bullying and school violence? It was a very important talk for me to give. And behind that was this research from the GAO. And I truly do think that if our teachers learned better skills on how to handle kids that are off track, that are disengaged, and began to engage them, we might have fewer fights, less violence, and a whole lot of people safer. Schools did not turn away and ignore the scary, weary kid in the hoodie. And instead, they talked to the student differently, as we were discussing here today. Imagine what if? And what do you wish your teachers knew about you? What if we asked them that? We might find out that the fourth grader who always gets in trouble at lunch always makes sure his younger brother who's in kindergarten gets to his kindergarten classroom on time after breakfast. We might find out, too, that an adolescent in high school who sits in English class and sleeps during the entire session actually worked until midnight the night before so he could make money for his family because dad lost his job. You just never know. We don't know because we don't ask. Who are you really? I see one side of you who gets in trouble, but I'm interested in this kid who's in front of me right now, sitting in my office, so respectful, listening to what I have to say. I want to know who that person is. And I want to share that person with other people in your life at school. Who are you really is what I might say. What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What shows do you like to watch? And what games do you play? I want to know you. And then here's the last question I might ask. What if we talked to your teachers this week and I could reintroduce you? That's a word I came up with years ago, particularly for kids who had reputations, to where if you go into a teacher's lounge and somebody mentions a kid named Tyler, they all groan. Oh gosh, he's in my class, unfortunately. What if, though, we could reintroduce teachers to a Tyler and share that Tyler works until midnight every night and he's very good at his job. But when he goes to class at school, the only class he does well in is psychology. The other three, he's failing. I want to know what's going on in psychology class. I want to ask that student, what's happening to help you make a 93 in that class? And that's a true story about a boy named Tyler. What could we learn from you? And what could we learn from that teacher that we could try out in your other classes? Making the student the expert. In 2024, skipping gears here for a second, David Epstein, David Marston, and Laurie Markham wrote a book entitled Narrative Therapy in Wonderland, Connecting with Children's Imaginative Know-How. And since I really enjoyed putting the two model solution focused and narrative therapy together, I loved this book. It is full of dialogue and case studies about how we ask questions to kids who are down and out, in trouble, disrespectful, not engaged, and bring out something called their wonderfulnesses. I know, crazy word, huh? Here's an adaptation of the wonderful interview for school situations. Get to know young people by asking them this. What do you wish your teacher knew about you? What else? And this is for the kid who comes into your office or your practice and they're in trouble at school. And they're expecting to hear from another adult all the things that are wrong with them. And instead, you say, what do you wish your teacher knew about you? What else? What would you begin doing on a small scale just for today to show your teacher that side of you? What else would you do? Now, some kids will say, I don't know. And that's honestly, I think they say, I don't know to these questions because they've never been asked a question like this. Rarely are students asked, what kind of side do you think you should show your teacher this afternoon when you go into chemistry class? Or I wonder what you might show your teacher on the playground today when you're out with the same group of boys you were yesterday, only this time you're not in trouble. What would you be doing? Takes them to a whole new place. And that's fine. It may take a little bit of time to get them to answer. But what we're doing here, again, is creating, and you all know this, the preferred futures of that student to where they can begin to imagine a miracle day. What would your classmates notice about you? What else? What difference might it make to you someday after you have a better day and your teacher notices you differently? Who would be the most pleased? One student said, my teacher would be. Okay, who else? Oh, my mom would be. Really, what difference would it make for your mom to be pleased? And one kid said, she wouldn't be called so many times from the school. Sometimes she has to come pick me up. Wow, so she wouldn't have to get calls from school, wouldn't have to pick you up. I wonder what difference that would make for her. I asked a mom that question once when I was talking to her son, a sophomore in high school, in my office. What difference would it make to you? You're not getting called. She said, I could actually do my job and not worry. The kid had no idea that calls like that kept his mom from being good at her job. It's good for kids to know what it would mean to someone for them to do well. So you keep asking what else, who else would be pleased. I'm going to show a video of a young man, Philip, age 9. He went to school one day a couple of years ago, and a girl who had irritated him constantly by throwing books down loud whenever she was angry at him because she just didn't like him. He didn't do anything to her. She just didn't like him. When she was upset with the assignment, couldn't do it, and he said, I can't help you, she threw her books down so loud. It really upset him too many times. Finally, one day he looked up at her and said, you know what? I'm sick of you doing this. Tonight, I'm going to go home, get my dad's gun, come back to school tomorrow, kill you, and I'll kill myself too. Well, that was a threat. And so he was suspended. He had to go get psychiatric care and get an assessment. So he came to our clinic at school, and the student therapist who saw him first did a fine job of joining with him, but there really was not much movement. And at one point, the student therapist told our clinic director that maybe he needed to be referred more to a a center or a rehab center or some kind of residential center to get him back on track. He wasn't sure. But I was very concerned about that because what if they didn't come back? And what if they didn't go to that referral? Instead, I wanted to teach my my school intern that you can work with anyone who walks into the door, and we need to. So I decided to go and do a session with him. And what you're going to hear in this very short video that is edited is what happened when we began to talk to Philip and his dad a little differently. I admit, as a person who is very passionate about stopping school shootings, that when I heard about this young person, age 9, that I had my own assumptions in my head. And then I saw him walk down the hallway. And I knew there was much more to this young person than just a kid who wanted to threaten someone's life. Although that's always important to take very seriously. So I will start and stop this on occasion as I show you this video just to illustrate what went on that day.
Sad.
Now this is my intern, my school intern over here, and he's going to be asking Dad about what are the wonderfulnesses about your son. Now I want you to look at Philip. He's got the hoodie on. He looks pretty sad. He doesn't want to be there. He's probably waiting to hear the same thing he's heard for the past couple of weeks about the incident and to see if he's going to get more criticism or whatever it was he was getting. But he's not going to get that in this room.
Based on it's our third or fourth time that we've gathered. Yes. And from what I see of Philip, I was kind of wanting to see from your words so he could hear it. But what are some of the wonderfulnesses that you see in him at home? Because when he was Steve, what a great child, young man he is.
This was Philip's first time to ever get in trouble at school. And that's really important information, isn't it? He's in 4th grade, age 9, never been in trouble. Not one time had Dad ever been called. So Dad was truly surprised when this happened. And so assumption might be the school, what's going on here as far as the quality of child he is. Apparently he's a good kid. And when I saw him walk down the hallway and look up at me and smile at me and say hello, I just could not picture him being a violent person. So we're off to see what are some wonderfulnesses that Dad has noticed about him at home.
And I'm going to go from there with our discussion.
And you know what is, I tell him all the time what I like about him and what he's even taught me from kid to adult. And I tell him, what's the thing I tell him? Tell you, what you teach me?
So Philip's teaching you stuff, Dad? Oh my gosh. Do you guys mind if I write these things down?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm going to give it to you in a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So.
You just talked about it the other day too. What you teach me?
Oh yeah, to what, just have fun.
Mm-hmm. To what?
Just have fun.
Just to tell Dad just have fun? I mean, does he need to do that sometime? Does he work too much?
Kind of.
How did you know he needed to have fun?
Because my sisters never want to play games with me, and then my dad barely ever does anything but work. And
so how is it you came to realize that Dad needed to have fun? You said he works a lot?
yeah, one time I was trying to ask him if he wanted to play a game, but he was working. So when I saw him working, I just walked away. I don't even think he noticed me out there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. What would you have played with them if you had said yes? What would you have played? Do you have a video game you like to play?
Mm-hmm.
Which one is it?
Yeah, it's called Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Because there's another game we played, we already beat that.
So Dad plays with you sometimes already?
Yeah.
Most of the time.
You're Sonic.
He told me, and again, this is edited, that he loved playing the game Sonic. And if you know Sonic, Sonic's the hedgehog, and Sonic runs very fast. a lot of times when I talk with kids, I'd like to ask them what kind of games they play and ask if we could even make a metaphor out of one of the characters. And that usually helps them relate to me pretty well. Notice too that the hoodie just came off, talking about things that he knows about. And when I'm asking him about the games he likes to watch, he's much more engaged. So I'm asking more about Sonic.
You're called Knuckles, and you are this kid that Dad talked about, who does all these things so well. And you go into school and you begin to someday in the future, and you show off Knuckles.
Now, apparently in Sonic, there is another character called Knuckles, and Knuckles apparently is a good guy. And so I'm asking him to think about if he were to go to school and he was, quote, Knuckles, and showing off those good attributes that Knuckles had, in the same way that Dad says he has these good attributes at home, what might he do? Obviously, I'm searching for exceptions and abilities. And so if I can find out what he does well at home with sisters and dad and mom, I'm going to see if I can add those to his expertise when he goes to school.
And maybe there's somebody who's all that they're all past, they're not paying attention to much like it. What did you do? What we noticed Knuckles doing? This kid that your dad described on the day. It would be different than the way things were the past few weeks.
Well, first off,
In other words, if you took Knuckles to school, how might what happened 2 weeks ago have been different?
tell them that I doesn't look like I'm paying attention, but I would definitely tell you that.
So he said he would tell his classmates that it may not look like he's paying attention, but he is, in an effort to get them to quiet down and give him a little space.
Gosh, I think it's amazing. So I would tell them, what should be going on that your teachers would notice about you? They would tell them Knuckles is here today. Maybe if the class got a little out, maybe a little unruly or something, or loud or something.
It's really though, it's only like a few kids, and it's those same kids every time.
Yeah. Yeah, so what if those kids are bugging you or just making noises and you're trying to work? What Knuckles do?
I like pretend that they're my sisters.
That was amazing that he would say, I pretend that they're my sisters.
I like pretend that they're my sisters
Which,
and just get them.
I wonder who would be pleased about that when you did that. Who'd be the most pleased that you did something like that?
My teacher.
Did he
For
really?
sure.
Yeah.
She doesn't like when it happens.
So this is just an example of a different kind of conversation to have with a young person who had made a violent threat. And again, we're not negating the fact that the threat should not be addressed and have the consequence. Naturally, it should. But I think it's what we do afterwards that we're really missing the boat on in schools. For example, when kids get suspended, like Philip, chances are that when they go back to school in 2 weeks or however long the suspension is, they're going to be greeted often by an administrator who's not happy to see them and teachers who are not happy to see them. And the kid feels that discourse and usually goes on to continue to act out. What I think instead would be much more helpful, at least when I've asked kids about it, they've agreed with me, is that they arrive back at the school. They're greeted by the administrator who says, welcome back. Let's go talk about how you can stay here and not be suspended anymore. I'm interested in getting to know you. That doesn't take a whole lot of time. And then they go into the office and they start talking and they get to know each other a little bit more. Again, he's going to be watched. But I also like for the parent to go back with the student, and I give them an idea of making sure the administrator knows this, saying to the administrator, Philip has been talking to a counselor and he wants to show you the kind of kid he really is. Would you mind watching out for those things he does that tells you he's not a kid who wants to kill someone? He's a kid who really wants just to study and have friends. Would you mind just watching? Changing the mindset of an administrator by doing something like that while going ahead and cooperating with the obvious consequence is very important. Because again, what happens to a lot of kids, according to the research I've read, is they're coming back to school after many suspensions. People don't want them to be there. Often there's a retaliation that happens between teachers and students who teachers don't want the kids in the classroom. They give them the evil eye when they walk in, mostly because they don't know what else to do. But what if those teachers too, when the kids came back into their classroom, they again walked up to the student and said, "Welcome back. Let's talk about how we can make things work. Let me know what I could do as your teacher to help you." Now, a lot of times these kids are not going to know what to say, and they'll probably say, "I don't know. I don't know." But we don't stop there, and we don't give up, and we don't walk away saying, "Oh, they don't care." No, 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 no. Instead, we go, "It's okay. I can understand you wouldn't know, but would you think about it? And I'll talk to you again after class, and maybe even tomorrow. I want us to find a way to work together." That's the first big step toward disengaging that kid from feeling badly about himself to engaging them as a class member, as somebody who's important, who feels important. After conversations like this, what needs to happen next is crucial. And this, I cannot emphasize what I'm going to share with you enough. After composing the answers given to you by the young person, make a copy and give it to them. Yep, give your notes to them. Walk the young person back to class. I cannot emphasize this enough. Whether they are 6 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old. When a student acts out and does inappropriate things and disrespectful things and gets suspended and then comes back in, the last thing that teacher wants is for that student in the class. If that happens, the teacher is going to probably go back to behaviors that, not that he or she made the child act out, but the kid is not going to feel welcome. And the only thing kids know how to do sometimes to respond is to act out again. So I always encourage my school counseling students at my university and those when I train them to walk the student back to the classroom. And by then, on the way, we might talk about, what do you think you might do in class just to show them that you are not the person they think you are? And kids told me some things possibly. So, okay, hold that thought. I walked down to the classroom with the student, knock on the door, ask the teacher to please step out. It takes me about 30 seconds. That's all. I say to the teacher, "Thank you so much for sending Jose to me before. He's now back from school suspension and he's coming back today. But he and I have talked about some things that he wants to show you a different side of him. Would you mind just noticing today in class what he tries to do?" Now, most of the time that will soften the teacher enough to where they'll say, "Oh, okay." But then I want to also acknowledge to that teacher, "Hey, and here's the thing. I want you to have the classroom you want as a teacher. I respect you as a teacher. I am a teacher. I want you to have the classroom with students in it so that you can teach." And that's why I've talked to him too, so he can be one of those students for you. Would you just watch? Typically, that will soften a teacher enough to have them put on another set of glasses when that student comes into the classroom. And that's what we're going to knock on the door. Tell the teacher thank you, again, for allowing your time with a young person. Let them know how much you appreciate their work as a teacher. Buy-in from teachers is crucial. And also tell the teacher, again, like I just mentioned, that the young person and you have talked and that the young person wants to try out new ideas, which were theirs, just for the rest of the class. And the teacher is just to watch. The solution-focused approach is action-oriented. The narrative therapy approach seeks our values and beliefs and stories that young people would rather be described as. Together, the discourse changes, which could result in more student engagement and less violence. We have to engage these students, everyone, the ones that are disengaged. We don't know what they're thinking at times, and often when they have no one else to turn to and feel like they're belonging anywhere, They turn to people that are not very safe for them. This approach is my hope that we can get kids engaged. For example, when they come back from being suspended, I often encourage schools to say to the student, again, we're glad to see you. Now we're going to ask you to participate in an activity or a club for the next 6 weeks at our high school or our middle school or our elementary school, just so they can experience being part of something. After 6 weeks, if you don't want to do it anymore, you don't have to. But we want to see what you can do with us. We're anxious to get to know you. May the solution force be with you as you seek the expert in every client. It has been a pleasure presenting to you today. I have here a QR code to my website. I do lots of free things for school counselors, social workers, and school psychologists all around the world. Since 2020, I have done something called SF Connection that at first went every week for 6 months during COVID, and then today continues on twice a month. So you could go there and you can scan this and you can go into my website to see where to register for free. And I appreciate each one of you for watching and listening to me today. Thank you so much.